Okay, welcome to our next installment in the Middot series, and tonight we're looking at the final Midah in the Sefiros of Tiferes, and we're looking at Malchut ShebeTiferet, monarchy, kingship within beauty. What does exactly that mean? So we've already seen that Malchus is the place within which Hashem's Gilui of his kavod is manifest. So as the Ramchal says in Klach Pesach Chachma, that the Metzius Chok Zeh, the reality of this principle, Sheyihu Nivraim Tachtonim, that there should be a creation down below, that's called Malchus. V'hu Kashar Kol HaKochos HaNimtzayim B'chol HaSfiros Lahotzi HaTachtonim. It is that which binds together all of those energies which exist from all of the upper spheros and bring them into the lower realms. Whereas Yesod is the delivery of all of those powers of the first five spheros. Malchus is how it manifests in the world. And so that's why the Shari Ora says it's called Bat Sheva, that it is satiated from all of the previous Midos that are above it, the seven above, because it's including Bina, which is the mother of all of the spheros, and how they kind of spill forward from the pool of potential which begins everything. And then ultimately, the Malchus is that which allows Hashem's kavod to be megala in the world below. And so I think one aspect of Malchus ShebeTiferet, as far as our purposes are here tonight, is realizing what you're a part of. Malchus ShebeTiferet tells us that within beauty is a sense of belonging. Recognizing that you are beautiful, that you have that sense of value within yourself, that there's an opportunity for harmony and coalescence of the details of your life, isn't enough for what beauty demands. Beauty, harmony demands that you recognize that you're part of a totality which you share and which you are as much an expression of as every other detail. And the expression that you are a part of is the kavod of Malchus Shemayim. And so that you are part of the expression of God's kingship in the world. That it's not just that you are a beautiful thing, and it's not just that there are beautiful things all over, and that it's not just that they're all connected, and it's not just that you should fight for that value, but it's that you're all expressions of an overarching shared place, a makom, which is the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so that's why we found this concept that Shlomo Melech talks about in Mishlei of Berov Am Hadras Melech, that the abundance of people is part of the glorifying of the king. Like we say, there's no king without a nation. That each individual from amongst the nation are themselves individuals who embody the expression of the Malchus Shemayim, and to the greater extent to which each individual feels himself as a part of that Malchus, so they become part of the Am, and they're expressing and glorifying the king. Now, on the inverse, knowing what you're a part of has its risks, because if you've ever had this experience before, if you've seen this or if you've ever had the opportunity to be a part of, suppose someone's a part of a symphony, right? So each individual, as part of the symphony, makes up this totality where when they all harmoniously come together, there's an incredible array of diversity, and we saw that diversity was part of what defines Tiferes. But a person can very easily use that situation as an opportunity to kind of own over the other individuals within the Malchus, within the totality. And one of the things that Shlomo Melech calls us upon to do is to hold back in individual beautification when you're part of a Malchus experience. The way Shlomo Melech puts this in his proverb, right, in Mishlei, where he writes, Al tisadar lifnei melech. Do not glorify yourself in the presence of a king, meaning don't express individual value in the presence of the king. Uvemekom gedolim al ta'amod, and in the place of great people, do not stand up high. Right, so it's like the one violinist who tries to take away the show in the middle of the orchestra all trying to work together. It destroys everything. And he continues and says, Shlomo Melech, he writes, Ki tov amar lecha alehena. It's better for the king to say, step up and forward into the limelight. Mehashpilcha lifnei nadiv, than for you to be sent down and castigated from the presence of a great one. In other words, there's a place for each individual to have their moment in the limelight when they're part of a Malchus. And that is part of the beauty of an orchestra. When all the other, instruments quiet down and all you hear is the incredible call of the violin into the silence. There's something that becomes part of the entirety in that expression of beauty. But to assert your own individuality in that context takes away from the sense of participation and belonging in a larger picture. And specifically when we're dealing with the Malchus of Hashem, for a person to impose their own value, their own beauty, and saying, no, my beauty is greater, my beauty is better, over the thing which itself gives you the opportunity to be beautiful, your music is only part of the symphony, part of the orchestra, in as much you're playing a part with the orchestra. So for you to try to own over and try to lord yourself over the rest of the orchestra is to take away from the experience of Malchus. And so this is why the Tomer Devorah writes, or Moshe Cordovero writes, when he's talking about how to conduct oneself in the Midah of Tiferet, and we already read part of this a few days ago, when we saw that the Tomer Devorah writes that the Midah of Tiferet is expressed in asek in Torah, engagement in Torah, but he continues and says, Amnam tzarich zihirut gadol, a person needs to be tremendously cautious, shelo yitga'eh adam b'divrei Torah, that a person shouldn't become haughty in words of Torah. Right? Exactly what we're saying. Shelo yigrom ra'ah gedolah, so as not to cause tremendous harm by becoming arrogant in your chelik in Torah over the totality of Torah, could cause tremendous harm. Sharei hu kamo shehu mizgaya kach gorem shemidas Tiferet shia Torah tizga v'tistalak l'malach chas v'shalom, that you're causing the Midah of Tiferet to depart by means of this. Rather, he says, Kol hamashbil atzmo b'divrei Torah, anyone who lowers himself, who knows his place, who takes his seat alongside the other members of the symphony, of the Malchus that he's a part of, Gorem el Tiferet shetered v'talshbil atzma lehashpia lemalchus. He says that you cause the Tiferet, that beauty, to descend into this world and kind of kneel at the feet in order to allow the flow of Malchus to be manifest. And so he's saying exactly our point, that recognizing your own Tiferet doesn't mean that you split away from the world. It means that you take your place alongside the rest of the world in being mar b'kvod Shemayim and in singing the praises of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as we say, Hashemayim misaprim kvodel u'ma'asei yadav magid rakia, that the entire world is singing the praises of God and recognizing Hashem's kavod. Now, another aspect of this is, because a person could get a wrong impression from this, that, take your place, don't lord over others, seems to imply a diminishment of self. Rav Kook writes a beautiful thing in his Shmona Kvatzim, in the 8 journals. In the 6th journal, he writes as follows. He says that a person who has the Midah of Malchus within themselves, which is Kabbalistically known as Letle Migarme Klum, that he has nothing of his own, he says it's a Midah of a Chisaron and Yitaron, which are mitchabrim ba b'noseh echad. It's a midah in which lacking and excess and extra are found connected in the same individual. Because he says what happens when a person has the midah of Malchus and recognizes that their beauty lives and is true insofar as it's part of the totality of being mar b'kvod Shemayim, he says what a person can do when they have the midah of Malchus is ra'ui hu adam zel lisfog letocho et hakol. You're the ultimate sponge, because you realize that you're not living alone in this world as this beautiful island, just as the Midah of Malchus is kolate and kolel, all of the upper middos, to manifest them into the world. He says, when you kashehu ponem el atov umakir, when he realizes that he doesn't have anything of his own except insofar as he's part of the Giloy of Malchus Shamayim, so he says, Harehu muchan lihiyot memula mikol tov. You're now ready to be full of all the goodness of the world. Because you realize that when you finish that orchestra, when the symphony is complete, the entire audience will stand and applaud you as part of that Malchus. So if a person thinks that they're on their own in this show on earth, then they've lost everything. But if they recognize that they're playing a part in a massive universal symphony of being Marbek Kvod Shamayim, they become themselves a receptacle for all of the beauty and all of the harmony and all of the Tiferes, which is manifest in the world, because it all becomes reflected through the prism that they themselves become in being Marbek Kvod Shamayim. And this becomes true also on an individual's level, as far as one's own life, putting together the pieces of one's own life, Klape HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the context of being Marbek Kvod Shamayim, such that Rav Nachman of Breslov writes in Likutei Moharan that when a person feels distant from a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and they feel like they don't have that closeness, he says that the entire world nowadays, it seems, says Rav Nachman, feels distant from Hashem. He says, "Hu rak mechamat she'ein lehem yishuv hadat." It's because they haven't settled into themselves yet. They don't have the calmness of awareness and reflection to know where each and every component of their own selfhood comes together. Ve'enam miyashvin atzman. They haven't learned how to settle themselves. And he says, therefore, v'ha'ikar, the main thing is lishtadel yashev atzmo hetev, to settle yourself well. Ma tachlit mikol ha'ta'avot mikol inyanei ha'olam hazeh. Find the purpose and the benefit to every one of the drives and desires that you have. Hein ta'avot ha'nichnasot laguf, hein ta'avot shechutz laguf, k'mo kavod. Whether it's the desires that you have on a physical level, whether it's desires that exist outside of yourself, like the seeking of honor and prestige and and money and whatever the things are that you find yourself. And he says, "Va'az bivadai yashuv al Hashem." Then, for sure, guaranteed, you will return to Hashem. Because when you find the Malchus within your own life, when you realize that all of the components of the harmony of your life can themselves be part of being Marbek Kvod Shamayim, and that there's nothing that doesn't have the opportunity for schar, as the Mishnah says, that havei mechashev schar avera, schar mitzvah keneged hefseda, and hefsed avera keneged schara, that everything has something to teach you, everything has its place in singing the Masei Yadav Magida Rakia. So then you realize that you yourself can step into the presence of that orchestra, of how the entire world sings that song. And I think that one more point of this is in having that realization, a person has the opportunity to express the klal, to express the malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu within their own self. And that the beauty that they represent is not just their own individual beauty, but if you realize you're part of that orchestra, then you realize that you are the orchestra. And that there's no orchestra without you. Like there's ein melech bli am. There is no malchus without each and every constituent of the am that comprises that expression of his malchus. And so this is why I think the Gemara we recently had in the Daf Yomi is an expression of this idea, where the Gemara said that a person should make sure that they're clean every single day. It said, "Rochetz adam panav yadav raglav b'chol yom." Every single day a person should be making sure that their body is clean, b'shvil kono, for the sake of their creator. It says Rashi, l'chvod konehu, for the honor of his creator. After all, ki b'tzelem Elohim asat adam. Man is made in the image of God. You're an expression of that malchus of Kvod Shamayim. As the pasuk says, "Kol po'al Hashem l'ma'aneu." Everything that Hashem has made has its purpose. And as Rashi says, "Hakol bara l'chvodo." Everything is expressive of God's honor. And that's something to recognize within ourselves. And that's also why the Gemara later in Shabbos says that if a person represents Hashem on a completely different level, such as the Talmud Chacham, a person who has committed their life to each and every moment living by wisdom and considering himself a student of wisdom, as the word Talmid Chacham literally means, a person who has subjugated himself to the Malchus Shamayim at all times needs to uphold that standard to an entirely different degree. And the Rambam paskins this lahalacha, but the language of the Gemara here and subsequently in Rashi is very powerful. But the Gemara in Shabbos says, "Amar B'chia bar Abba, Amar B'Yochanan, Gnai hu l'Talmud Chacham, sheyetze b'minalim abtulayim l'shuk." That it's a disgrace for a Talmud Chacham to go out into the shuk, into the public place, with holes in their shoes, with patches over their shoes. It's disgusting. And says the Gemara, Amar Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Talmid Chacham shenimtza revav begadav. If you have a Talmid Chacham who's got a smear on his clothing, a little stain, a little cholent dripping down on the side, says the Gemara, Chayiv Misa. There's a death penalty associated with that. Why? Says the Gemara, an unbelievable drasha. What, you think it's just a bizayon for yourself? Kavod Adam, Kavod Brios. I got to respect myself. The Rambam says you got to have, Middot Beininus, you got to be clean. No, says the Gemara. The reason is because you're causing humanity to hate God. Humanity's going to hate God because of you. Says the pasuk in Mishlei, Kol masniai ahavu maves. Kol masanai ahavu maves. Says, don't read that as misanai, those who hate me. Those who ela masniai, those who cause me to be hated, the pasuk says. And therefore, someone who's unclean in the public sphere causes Hashem to be hated. Says Rashi. So it says, Chayiv Misa, shetzarach lios chashuv v'hagun l'chvod Toraso. You have to be respectable. You have to be presentable for the honor of the Torah, for the kavod that you represent. What does it mean, masniai? Shemima'asin atzman be'enei habrios. That you're going to be disgusting in the eyes of creation, in the eyes of all people in the world. This is the Am, right? This is the people. This is the orchestra. And the orchestra is going to see you. And what are they going to say? Vabrios omrim. You know what creation is going to say about a person like that? Oy lehem lelomdei Torah. Woe is it to those people who study Torah. Shehem me'usim umegunim. That they're disgusting, they're despicable. Nimtza zeh masnias Torah. What ends up happening? You are the portal to the Torah. You're expressive of the klal. And therefore, by hating you, they're going to hate the Torah. They're going to hate the Torah by association. And so a person needs to recognize that they're not just an individual when you're part of that orchestra. You're not just the incredible violinist standing there on the stage. The Tiferet that you have to know about yourself is that you express the Malchut Shamayim. And that when you walk out into the street, you're representing the Malchut Shamayim. And if there's anything, a schmear that causes the smallest tinge of negativity towards you, that itself is causing a disgrace of the Malchut Shamayim and ultimately takes away from the beauty of the entire world. And like Rav Kook said, to the extent that an individual grows, the entire world grows with him. I think that we can say that the inverse is true. That if a person is minimized, the entire world is dragged down along with him. And the Malchut ShebeTiferet demands of us that we don't view ourselves as some beautiful tropic oasis floating off in the middle of the Pacific, but rather we see ourselves as members of an orchestra. That each one of us playing that incredible symphony, even though we're playing our own, if you ever seen one of those collaborative things, like Kulu Lam or one of these, where they take like tens of thousands of people together and like they're all in different rooms around the world. And when you realize that each individual could be by themselves and be on their own, but you're not playing the symphony alone. You're part of a totality. And that each individual expresses the klal. The beauty that is you is only that beautiful because it's an expression of the entirety of Ma'aseh Bereishis. And so that's something that we can, I think, carry with us as we bring the week of Tiferet to a close. To realize that ultimately our beauty is more than just our responsibility. It's our responsibility to the world to allow our beauty to shine, to give expression, full unadulterated expression to the beauty that we contain within us. But more than that, to realize that in expressing that beauty, we are not only being marbek kvod shemayim in the entire world, but we're stepping into the most incredible show on earth. That we're not doing this on our own, but that although a person can say that bishvili nivra ha'olam, ultimately you are not an island. You live as part of an integrated universe, and that each and every individual has a part to play within that symphony. And possibly that's why the Mikubalim say that in Shemayim, in the spiritual realms, the Sha'ar of Nigun, the gateway of music, is directly next to the gateway of Teshuvah. Because when a person recognizes that their entire life is their own act within the symphony, There's no deeper way of returning back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And ultimately, that teshuvah, which as Rav Kook says, begins, the first step of teshuvah, is lashuva adam el atzmo, el shoresh nishmato, that a person has to return to themselves, to the source of their own soul. It's beyond that, recognizing that in doing so, as Rav Kook also says, you're returning to the nishama shel kol neshamot. You're returning back to the soul of all souls, the source of all being. And then ultimately, you express that klal wherever you go. So those are some thoughts for Malchut ShebeTiferet. Thank you again for joining another incredible week together, exploring the Middot of Tiferet, and hope to see you all again tomorrow night.